Thanks so much for visiting Tea and Butty on YouTube. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Hello and welcome to the Tea and a Butty podcast. I'm Dominic.
And I'm Erica.
Today's episode we're going to be talking about something completely different. It's the British invasion of the 1960s.
Completely different from what?
From everything else that we've talked about.
I think everything we talk about is completely different from everything else we talk about.
No, sometimes it can be the same, I think. Because I think, that's up to you. Do you think our episodes sometimes are similar? I mean, I'm not talking about the part ones and part twos, which this is going to be a two-parter, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think so.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the other...
Because the British invasion happened a couple of times. Well, happened a few times, actually.
Well, it did, yeah, but I mean...
The British invasion actually has its roots in the 1700s, if we're going to go back that
Well, yes, it does. I mean, military speak, of course, speaking of army-wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was...
it was an actual invasion.
It was an actual invasion where towns and cities were actually captured.
Yeah.
But this one we're talking about, the British invasion of the 1960s, was purely a cultural and, well, mostly a musical experience.
But I mean, as far as our podcast, I think this is right on brand, actually.
Right on brand, because, I mean, we like to talk about British and American things, being as we are British and American.
Yeah.
And, the differences between the two countries and the similarities and everything.
And if you guys have been listening to us for a while, you know that we're big Beatles fans, so it kind of only...
This ties in.
Yeah, it just goes
This
along
ties
with
in
that.
very well, yeah.
The whole British invasion thing. I actually cannot believe that we haven't talked about this before.
We've touched on it.
And I guess maybe that's what you mean when you're saying that our podcasts are sometimes similar, because, we've been going for over 200 episodes now.
200 episodes? This is 201.
Yeah, so
we're starting in the bicentennial era.
So I mean, it's only going to be, expected, I think, that we might accidentally
We're going to repeat ourselves.
Yeah, we might accidentally cover something that we've already talked about in the past. But, our listenership changes over time.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're new here, then, and you can't be bothered to listen to the old ones.
Yeah.
Here we are. This is 201. You're at 201 right now.
The thing is it was you and I that were doing the talking about whatever the subject was.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, and we're just talking to each other.
And even I can't remember. So
what?
It's like, why?
Remember what?
Why should our listeners remember if it's something we've already talked about?
Yeah, I think our first episode 1, 001, was about tea, I think.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
yeah. Yes.
So if you remember that one, then, we sounded younger then.
You've been here a long time.
200 years ago.
We appreciate your support.
We do, yes. 200 years.
Yeah.
What a innings. Anyway, on to the topic.
Yeah.
Basically, the British invasion, I mean, if you don't know, it was something that happened in 1964, and upon research, because, it's got to have ended somewhere, they dated around 1967 that it ended. And I kind of agree with that, because they're kind of taking into the account, like, American bands gaining prominence.
Okay.
Back in the charts.
Yeah.
Because a bit of a background, we're starting with popular music here. Like the very 1954-55 rock and roll in the USA was in full swing.
Yeah.
It was getting there. I mean, Elvis was coming up.
Buddy
Holly, Bill Haley and the Comets.
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
The Big Bopper.
Mm-hmm.
Eddie Cochran. All them people were, the rising stars. The teenagers were loving them. They were making money. Of course, the adults were just kind of like, oh, this stuff, this terrible rock and roll, this riff-raff,
Yeah.
you know, and jungle music or whatever they used to call it. You know,
Yeah.
they did not like it at all. But then it all kind of ground to a halt, kind of spectacularly, in 1958, 59.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing was Little Richard retired.
Oh, yeah.
To become a preacher.
Yeah.
And Jerry Lee Lewis was involved in like a scandal because he married his 13-year-old cousin.
Yeah.
So he was kind of taken off, you know, the adults were like, oh, he's a terrible man. Yes, take him away.
Yeah.
Elvis went in the army.
Yeah.
He went and did his national service, so, you know, they give him a haircut and he went in the army, and that was that was Elvis. You know, he was neutered as far as people were concerned, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, he came out again, I think, in 1960, and of course it was a big hubbub, but he was kind of doing croonerish songs.
Yeah.
And he wasn't really like Jailhouse Rock, and he wasn't doing what he was in the early. He kind of like just come out, and he was just kind of coming out with like, she looks like an angel, you know. She's the devil in disguise, you know. He was kind of doing like Bing Crosby type things, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just like, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing, you know, and they call it this, the day the music died.
Yeah, I wondered if you were getting to that.
Yeah, it was Buddy Holly, Richie Valens and the Big Bopper and their pilot were killed in a plane crash in 1959, February 59. It was a tour from hell.
Yeah.
It was like a snowstorm, took off in a snowstorm or something, and they crashed. And they all were killed instantly, and it was like a shock. And that was kind of the end of rock and roll in America. It was kind of like, and I credit it with the rise of the teenage tragedy ballad that America seemed to fall in love with around that time. Because I'm kind of like into like looking at the social norms and stuff of the time period.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's where it all kind of started.
I mean, you know, you're listing all of these things that happened. Did they all happen in 58? All of the things that you just mentioned? Or
50, I think Little Richard retired in 57. Elvis went in the army in 58.
Because Chuck Berry also had a scandal. And
he was arrested in 59.
He was arrested for taking...
Or 58.
Yeah, for taking an underage girl across state lines, I think it was.
Yeah, and so he was arrested and he was jailed for like 5 years. Yeah. Eddie Cochran died in 1960. He was in the UK, actually. It was a car crash in the UK. But yeah, I mean, that's, you know, it was already on the wane by that time.
Yeah. I mean, I use the word funny. Obviously, it's not funny, but it's weird.
It's weird that these tragedies happen, but
all happen around the same time. Yeah, and you don't really think about it either because
they were all young kids. You know, they were in their 20s. You know, and it was just kind of like they were just getting started on this like thing, and then it was just cruelly cut off by fate.
Yeah.
You know, plane crashes, car crashes, getting thrown in jail, you know, and going in the army, you know.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, I mean, Elvis had a career afterwards, obviously, you know, and he didn't die,
well,
you know.
Well,
he did die,
well.
but, you know, yeah, and Chuck Berry did as well. But not, you know, Elvis didn't die until later, you know. But it was, you know, all these people, I think, the Buddy Holly thing and the Eddie Cochran dying, it kind of like, these teenage tragedy ballads started coming up.
Yeah.
And they were flooded. They became really popular, you know, like Moody River and you know, like, you know, you've probably heard them. They were really popular in America at the time, like Dead Man's Curve.
Oh, yeah.
Leader of the Pack, Tell Laura I Love Her. Pat Boone, he was like...
Yeah.
He was like, I think he did Moody River, didn't he? And it was about a girl who committed suicide or something.
I'm not sure.
It was, you know, and people usually died in motorcycle accidents or racing their friends, and it was like, oh, it's a very sad story.
It's funny because
it was like, and America was into this. You know, it was like they were very popular around that time. I mean, it was kind of in contrast to like the teen idols that came out that were polished, and Frankie Avalon, Fabian, and all that. And it was just kind of like, it was drudge. Really, most of it was. It was very drudgy, and America was just in this depressed kind of state.
I mean, you still had, all throughout this time, of course, country music was going
country
on.
music,
You still had crooners singing all the...
Frank Sinatra,
all the standards.
Tony Bennett, all that, yeah. I mean, but popular music, that was what the teenagers were listening to. Mm-hmm. It was absolute crap for the most part. I mean, the Beach Boys were just getting their start, but they really hadn't got a foothold in the States, you know.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't really any... Elvis
there wasn't a lot going on.
Yeah, Elvis, everybody thought, oh, he's become weird, you know, he's singing these songs about devils in disguise, and it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit like, ooh, you know, what's going on here, you know? And he's doing these movies and stuff, you know, he wasn't like the new hot thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was still pretty popular.
Yeah, I'm not saying, I mean, you just have to look at the amount of freaking Elvis fans there are around the world.
Yeah. And the number of movies that they put out. It's
yes,
like, they were all basically
he was still
the same
popular,
thing,
but he was kind of like in the middle of his career at that point, even, you know, because going in the army, it didn't really help his career, you know.
Well, yeah.
It kind of, you know, a lot of the kids kind of forgot about him.
Yeah,
shall we say, you know. So, you know, like all these, like the teenage population of America at the time were just kind of like, oh, what's going on? You know, there's nothing's happening, you know. It was all very middling and stuff like that. And then, of course, JFK being assassinated happened. And that just kind of capped it off then. I think American kids were like, oh, you know...
Yeah, our first, like, young president.
Our first young president. What is going on? Everything is just so negative, so, you know...
Yeah.
Pop music's so drudgy, and it's just like, we need something new and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and it was on that day, I think CBS were going to report about this new craze that was hitting Britain at the time.
Yeah.
And they didn't. They put it off because of the assassination turned up. And I think Walter Cronkite was like, okay, yeah, this is... You know, this is all heavy stuff. We need something light to report. Find us something light. And it was like this funny piece about this group in England that were causing all the girls to go crazy called the Beatles.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they put that on, and, you know, it was kind of like making fun. It's like, haha, look at what they're doing in England. But that was it for the kids. The kids were like, yeah, we need this over here now.
Yeah. I think you're making a bigger deal about it than it was. I don't know that.
What do you mean you don't know that?
I mean, no, that came on. You know, Ed Sullivan? No, wait, what did you...
Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, no.
No, it was kind of like the kids... No, I'm not saying kids were like, oh, yes, we must have the Beatles now.
Yeah, it wasn't saying, like, we demand the Beatles come over
here.
No,
it wasn't like that. It was like, you know, the mentality was like, it was growing, you know. It was like like Marsha Albert, I think, was the first kid in America to play a Beatles record on American radio. And she'd seen the report, and she wrote to a DJ, because the DJs were all the rage back then.
Yeah.
Saying, why can't we have music like that over here?
Yeah.
And so he got a copy of, I think, I Want to Hold Your Hand or something, and that's when everything kind of started, and Capitol were like, oh yeah, we better release this group over here now, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, you know, when they arrived...
Well, Ed Sullivan...
And they appeared on the Ed Sullivan, which was basically people...
Ed Sullivan had seen them, had seen the craze, had been to Britain and had seen the craze, and was like, we need to get these kids on the show over here. We need to get
the kids on the show. Yeah, but again, this was the old guard thinking, that's a bit of a joke, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, it's a bit of a funny, it's like,
well, that's what a lot of the acts on the Ed Sullivan show were, you know,
yes,
kind of silly, you know, or like, yeah.
It's a bit of a joke, and, you know, like, we'll have a laugh at these kids, you know, these crazy kids with the hair and everything, you know?
Yeah.
And singing these songs or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, when they got on the Ed Sullivan show, it was a cultural milestone, I think, particularly for America.
Yeah.
Because it heralded, like, the end of that kind of same period, you know, where everything was going the same way and, you know? And it kind of like, the transition happened like there, you know?
Yeah.
1964.
I mean, there was obviously already
And that was akin back then to going viral.
Well, yeah, that's what I was just going to say. They had already gone viral, let's say.
In Britain.
no, in America, amongst teenagers, because they had a hit. They had a hit before they came for Ed Sullivan, wasn't it? It was "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
It was "I Want to Hold Your Hand." Yeah, it was, but it was like it was like it was January or something. It came out.
Yeah, but I mean, it was big enough. It had gone viral, to use that phrase, amongst teenagers. Because when they came over, the kids flooded the airport.
Yeah,
you know, they were ready for them at the airport.
In November 1963, in America, the Beatles were very much unknown. Mm-hmm. But by February 1964, everyone knew who they were.
Yeah.
You know, disapproving parents, kids, everything like that, you know.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's kind of amazing when you think about it, because, you know, it wasn't like it is now, you know, that the internet wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
There was no internet. It was just kind of like, it was the workings. I mean,
people read newspapers.
People read newspapers, and it was just kind of like this kind of sheer force of fate coming together to make this band popular over here. Because before them, British acts like Cliff Richard and the Shadows, I think he only had one hit over here. With it was a top 40 hit, you know, with Living Doll.
Yeah.
And Acker Bilk had like Strangers on the Shore, but it was like they were looking for homegrown talent over here, you know.
British acts had been trying to break into the American market, like trying to get a #1 in America for years and years.
Years and years,
and I mean, that's
a couple of people broke, but it was just kind of like for like that 1 week or whatever. It wasn't
Well, no, I mean, they broke. They played over here, because a lot of the times you hear that and you think, oh, what? Before the Beatles, there were no famous British singers over here? Of course there were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of course people knew British singers over here, but they just didn't have, I don't think, a *1.
I think actually Acker Bilk did, but he wasn't singing, he was playing the clarinet. He was like, that was another thing in Britain as well. It was like Cliff Richard was the biggest star in Britain at the time.
Yeah.
In the early 60s. Mm-hmm. And he was having success in Europe too, but he was not breaking the American market, and he never did, really. He never did.
I'd say most Americans have never heard of Cliff Richard.
Yeah. But he was huge. My mother was obsessed with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where his kind of like career went to when the Beatles and the rest of them cleared the decks.
Yeah.
They went to like people who were like, oh, you shouldn't be into that Cliff Richard, he's terrible, oh, look at him with his hair and everything, because he had the like Elvis type hair. He was like Britain's version of Elvis Presley in the late 50s and early 60s.
Yeah.
But when the Beatles came, it was like, oh, you should be listening to that Cliff Richard, he's a nice boy. Not the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. I don't want, you know.
Right.
So the Mothers liked him then, and that's where he had his career with the Housewives and the Mothers, and you know, they were all like, ooh, Cliff, you know, like my mother was obsessed with him and the Shadows.
So the Beatles got the ball rolling, basically.
They got the ball rolling over here. They came over, boom, you know, it was like, okay, and the teenagers was like, okay,
give us more, we want more.
We want more, so the Rolling Stones came over.
Yeah.
The Animals came over. Mm-hmm. The Hollies, the Yardbirds, Herman and Hermits, you know, the Who, they all kind of achieved success.
Yeah.
Jerry and the Pacemakers too, they had a couple of hits over here.
Yeah.
And it was like this big, like, oh, you know, this voracious appetite for, like, you know, screaming girls, you know, it was like mania. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's like the Rolling Stones heralded kind of like a different alternative to the Beatles. I mean, you know, there's that thing of like, oh, that they pitted them as rivals to the Beatles and everything. But really, they were just kind of like heralding a different kind of music.
Yeah.
I mean, they played pop and everything, but the Beatles had this pop, polished kind of sound, you know.
The Beatles were very poppy in the beginning.
And they had the uniforms and the haircuts. And, the uniform, like, suits and the matching suits, and they looked... You know, they looked very like a gimmick, like they'd been processed in a factory.
Yeah. And
it's like they weren't, obviously, but they looked like that, whereas the Stones just turned up with whatever they were wearing, smoking, and they were on stage, and like, all right, Keith, yeah, let's do it. You know,
were
let's play
a bit
the
more
gig.
shiny. Like, they seemed a bit more... Once the parents...
Well, that was Brian's
Once the parents could get past the long hair.
Terrible long hair, and
marks.
I can't understand them, and they're not from this country. They're very un-American.
They seemed more behaved. They seemed...
When the Stones came, it was like,
you didn't mind
so
your daughter getting into the Beatles, you know what I mean? Like, they seemed like they were probably nice boys, you know what I mean? Like,
dirty fingernails, long hair, don't like them.
And notice I say they seemed.
Yeah, they seemed like that, because,
Whereas the Stones, they were the alternative.
They were the alternative. It was just kind of like they were more raucous in their image.
Yeah.
And,
Whereas behind the scenes, they were basically the same.
They were the same.
Yeah.
They were the same. And it's like there was no rivalry between them. They used to hang out together all the time. Mm-hmm. They were big mates. And it was just like, that was just the press. But the Stones had this kind of like rough and ready, just turn up, do the gig and whatever, and they just looked all dirty and grimy. Like they just rolled out of bed and, they're singing raunchy thing. And of course, Mick's doing his Elvis Presley. Mick danced around all geratedly, and they were just like big lips and everything, just like it was just. I can imagine Middle America going, no,
get those lips out of here.
No. I do not want you being into that Mick Jagger. I want you to be into that John Lennon and that Paul McCartney. Yes, those are the types. Look, they're nice with their hair.
Until 1966. And then it was like, get those Beatles out of here.
Get those Beatles out of here. Especially in the South. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yes, it was that kind of thing. Like the Animals were the same sort of thing as the Rolling Stones. There was like a bluesy, gritty sound,
Yeah.
They were doing like covers of Muddy Waters and stuff. And whereas the Beatles were covering Chuck Berry and straight rock and roll, but they were writing their own songs and being poppy and, they were just having their own type of thing. But yeah, around 66, 67, the mania died down because, American groups got in on the carnage.
Yeah.
You had the Byrds, you had Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Beach Boys, yeah.
Yeah.
And they'd started to come up in prominence,
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, oh, we've got some homegrown talent here, and
it's so funny because it's like they were sort of ripping off the British bands who were ripping off American bands.
Well, American group, American. Because, there wasn't really any...
American singers.
Yeah, because there wasn't really any...
Like, full-on
bands. Yeah, because I think that's what made the Beatles stand out.
Mm-hmm.
Is they were a band. They weren't like one singer. They weren't a Chuck Berry. They weren't a Buddy Holly and something, They weren't Bill Haley and something, There wasn't the, Elvis Presley and the Jordanaires, It was...
Yeah.
There was only one guy you had to focus on.
Yeah.
So I can understand why Cliff didn't break over here, because it was like he was the same as what had been before, and they were kind of getting tired of that.
Mm-hmm.
But he kind of he was big in Britain because it was like homegrown talent and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
But then the Beatles came, boom, everything was kind of like the scene was changed, the game was changed, and that was it.
Well, music evolved during the 1960s very rapidly.
Very rapidly. And when you think about it, today it's still... Today's acts, they're still influenced by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Cream, Eric Clapton, everything that was going on in the Beach Boys, everything that was going on in the 60s, that's when it kind of began for today's music.
Yeah. And a lot of people attribute the kind of rapid evolution from the early 60s to the late 60s to drugs.
Oh yeah, drugs.
I don't think it was just drugs though. Obviously it probably they played a part, but I think it was just that there was just this kind of creative energy that you can't really put into words just happening, and it kind of only happens like, I won't even say once in a lifetime. I'll say like just maybe like once every 100 years or
something. Yeah, really, yeah.
It's like it was just a kind of thing that you cannot put into words. It was like a kind of magic, It's a
kind of magic. Queen, yeah, they came out in the 70s though. So.
Yeah. you just can't really describe it accurately. And it was more than drugs. It was more than just, it was like something in the air.
It was something in the air. And I mean, you know, by that time, you know, it was like, oh, England was this rock mecca, you know, and everything, and all the big bands. Swinging London, swinging England. I mean, and it was kind of like, you know, I mean, it's not still that way, but I don't know what it was. It was like it was just a strange kind of thing.
Everything was what the creative energy was inspiring everyone else, not just in music. You had art, you had fashion.
Well, fashion, yeah. I mean, you know, the Mary Quant and Twiggy and all that, you know, and the mini skirt, all that kind of stuff, the boots, you know, it was just all kind of like coming together. Art, films, you know, there you go again, you know, films like the James Bond series and stuff were coming out in the 60s that were like, you know, a British, you know, British inspired, British, you know, whatever. You know, everything was like, oh yeah, let's look to.
Well, the fashion was too, like you just said. Mary Quant was with the
Chelsea boots,
with the mini skirt and the boots. Yeah, that look came out of Britain.
Go-go boots and everything. Yeah.
The haircuts.
Yeah.
It's just like everything.
There is still a British haircut that hasn't really caught on over here too.
Oh God, yeah.
It's like, you know, and it's like the punks. It's kind of evolved from the punk scene, you know. The mod haircut, funnily enough, it is.
Yeah, the mod haircut. And that was in like...
Because the Beatles balanced both mod and rocker. But there were some bands like the Small Faces that went straight mod, you know. They cut their hair into that kind of like, you know, Steve Marriott hairstyle, which, again, was repopularized by Paul Weller in the late 70s and still... And,
Paul Weller, yeah.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff. You know, the mod revival and the late 70s, early 80s and
the
stuff.
hair, I'm also thinking of, like, Ronnie Wood.
Yeah.
Rod Stewart. That hairstyle, nobody that was not British has ever had that hairstyle.
It was kind of like a proto-mullet. I mean, because it kind of started in, like, the early 70s. Like, the Bay City Rollers had it. It was like this mullet. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, Paul had it in the mid 70s too, but he went really freaking crazy with his, you know. And I mean, the mullets were like the in thing, but they kind of never, you know, they kind of like trimmed them up and they made them just look like Boofy. And well, David Bowie had it for a little while, but he was always changing around. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, you know, when they do like this is Spinal Tap, which was like a mockumentary that, you know, all these 70s bands, they look like the Rolling Stones, you know.
Yeah.
They're all just like unshaven and they have that hair. And they're just like, all right, Jeff, yeah, knock it on there. Yeah, all right, mate. Yeah, we're going to turn it up to 11 now, you know.
But just imagine what America would be like today had that British invasion not happened in the 60s.
You'd probably still be listening to Fabian.
We'd all
turn
be like,
me loose.
You know, we'd be like dressing more properly, which
you'd have these kind of glasses that I'm wearing now, Brill cream haircuts, you know, those polo shirts and trousers up to your freaking nipples.
Yeah, I don't know.
And that's just the women. It's just the guys would be wearing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It would be like stuck in the 1950s, you know.
I don't know. It's crazy to think.
Hands on hips going, son, I don't think you should be listening to that kind of music. That's just not how we do things here. Drink your milk.
Yeah.
Eat your meatloaf.
I mean, it's crazy to think.
Watch the Ed Sullivan Show.
How many things were affected by basically music
by the rest of the world, because I mean, you know, at the end of the day, the Beatles were kind of copying stuff that was going on in Germany, and the French art scene, and everybody, the existentialists, you know, the haircut kind of evolved from that, you know. They kind of took everything from including in the music and the fashion. They just kind of like, oh, what we like, can we make that work? Yeah.
And the thing is they were coming from a culturally different experience than like white and black people in America.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It wasn't exactly the same in Britain as
I mean,
it was
you know,
over here.
it was
that's not to say there was not racism, because obviously there was and has been, and you know.
Was post-war kind of like mentality where, again, you know, like, have to cheer ourselves up here. you know?
Yeah.
We have to do something to cheer ourselves up.
Yeah.
After that, you know? So, boom, it came out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And all people going, oh, it should be national service. Ooh. It's like, no, we're having fun here.
And that was another thing, you know, when they came over here, they refused to play to segregated audiences.
Yeah, they
Beatles
did. Well, they because particularly in like Florida or somewhere, I think it was, and in the southern states, they were just like, oh, with you know, they found out somehow that they're going to separate the audience, black and white.
And they was like, that is completely
And it was like,
bizarre.
no, we're not going to play to segregated audiences. Yeah. And apparently they were going to, they threw a fit.
Yeah.
That the, whoever was doing it said, they can't do that. They can't tell us what to do. But they were like, yeah, but they're going to bring in a lot of money.
Yeah,
so.
It's like, yeah, they can.
Yeah, so you've got to either suck it up or tell them no. You know, and goodbye. So, and lose potentially friggin' hundreds of
so that made a big difference,
dollars,
I'm sure. You know, obviously probably all the other British bands did the same thing, you know, because they weren't used to that. Like, that was just completely weird and wrong. It's like for them.
Yeah, and it's just like, yeah, I mean, it must have been a strange country to like British people back then. Yeah, I mean, nowadays it's still a little bit of a strange country, but but in that, and it was just like, what? I mean, you know, I've read like Eric Burden's book about the animals coming over here, and he was like, oh yeah, we used to get terrible, you know, because we were just like, oh no, you know, and we don't care about that. It's like, oh, you Negro lovers, get out of here, you know, and stuff like that. And it's just like, it's just like, that was just like, it's just ridiculous, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, their mentalities, the fact that they were from somewhere else, that influenced obviously bands and just people in general over here, I imagine. You know, they don't really get a lot of credit, I don't think, these British invasion bands, for just how much they changed. I think they get they get the credit for, oh yeah, you changed music changed, but everything changed. Yeah, everything changed just because they came from somewhere else, and you know, where things were different, and were able to break into mainstream over here, and that just influenced just people's ways of life, even, you know. It's like, it's really, really crazy.
They played a part, definitely.
It's really more than we have time to talk about, even.
Yeah, because we're a little bit over time now.
Yeah, so. I mean, we're just really scratching the surface.
We're just really scratching the surface of the cultural implications.
Yeah,
here.
Like if you find this topic interesting at all, there are plenty of books that talk about the British invasion and
its cultural impact on the US.
Yeah, I mean, you can even just read like biographies of some of these people, like Dominic mentioned Eric Burden's biography, Keith Richards' biography, Eric Clapton's biography. Yeah. You know, any book about the Beatles, we could definitely recommend. Tune In is really good. It's just about their early career, though. Their lives and their career. Yeah. But yeah, there's so many books that you guys, all the books.
But yes, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid.
We gotta go. We could go on and on and
on. Go on and on and on and on. And we'll talk about the second British invasion. Yeah. In the 80s. Yeah. I mean, it was much less. We'll talk about it then.
We could keep going here, and we would. So we just have to kind of cut ourselves off. But yeah, next time we'll talk about British invasion of the 80s. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You know, if you're like Dominic and think that this was a little bit of a different topic, then we hope you enjoyed that. Yes. And we appreciate your support as always, and we will talk to you next time.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.